Greetings, math fans. All right, so this is our second day, and we're going to talk about amplitude. Okay, really, when I talk about amplitude, I'm talking about how high that graph goes. So remember how we talked about the domain and the range, and we said, of course, the domain is all real numbers from negative infinity to positive infinity, and then the range was between -1 and 1. Well, that's going to change now, all right? And that's because we said before, that was between -1 and 1, and so the graph only went up to that value. Well, now we're going to go at a higher value or lower value depending on what we're talking about, and we're always going to deal with negatives, okay? So let's let me just write out. So this is amplitude. Let me write it again here. Amplitude, and it's y equals a sine of x and y equals a cosine of x. Okay? And the amplitude is equal to the absolute value of a. Now notice I put absolute value around there, okay, because amplitude is always positive. That's so huge, math fans. It's always positive. Please don't ever give me an amplitude that's negative. It's always the positive value. All right? So just a little practice here. If I said y is equal to 8 sine of x, the amplitude equals 8. If I said y is equal to -105 sine of x, the amplitude is positive 105. All right? Never a negative. It's really, really important. Okay? And really, if I give you guys a maximum, let's say if this is 8, what's going to go on is that goes all the way up to 8, and this goes to -8. All right, so from like the 0 point, you're going to add 8, and from the 0 point, you're going to subtract 8, and that's going to be your basically the maximum and the minimum height of the curve. Maximum is 8, the minimum is -8. Okay, that should be pretty reasonable. All right, so let's start out with graphing a couple of these guys. If I have y is equal to 2 sine of x, now I am going to ask you guys to plot for every problem 5 points. All right, I'm going to show you kind of a weird way of doing this, and it really is a pretty good way. It's all based off of normal sine graph being between 0 and 2 pi for a period. Same thing with cosine. All right, and you're basically going to set up a compound inequality, and you're going to solve it. And right now, you're going to see some things that I'm going to do, and you're going to say, "Well, that's really kind of silly. Why are you doing this?" Because if you practice these good habits, then when you get to more complicated problems, it'll really work out for the better. All right, so let's kind of start out here. First of all, the amplitude for this problem is 2. Okay. Then what you're going to do is this value right here. You're going to set up a compound inequality. X is between 0 and 2 pi, and that's always the case. So I'm going to highlight that. It's always between 0 and 2 pi for sine of x and cosine of x. Changes when you go to other trig functions. So, and let's see. This is, I guess, I can highlight this too. That's always going to be the case, and that x. It's whatever that x is, but in this case here, it is just x. It could be 2x, it could be x plus pi over 5, whatever. Okay, that is that's going to go in that area there. Now, in order to figure out the period, it's the right side minus left side. So it's 2 pi minus 0, which is 2 pi. Again, that 0 is going to change. The 2 pi is going to change. Actually, the 2 pi is not going to change, but the 0 might change. That's why. But I'm still showing you some basics to understand how to do the later problems. All right. So period's 2 pi, and I am actually going to plot 5 points. So I need to find 4 spaces in between. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to do something called an increment. And I don't believe this is in your book, but that's okay. It's something that I created here. And the increment is 2 pi, which is this value right here, the period. divided by 4. And that 4 is always 4 because I want 4 spaces in between, which will give me 5 points. All right. Anyway, if you do 2 pi over 4, that reduces 2 pi over 2. That's your increment. All right. So then when I go to graph this, that helps me with my graphing. And what the deal is, see this inequality? It's between 0 and 2 pi. That's one period, and that's what you're going to see. You're going to see one period, and so it's 0, and then the increment is pi over 2. So what I have here is I start out with 0. That's this 0 right here. And then I add pi over 2, which is my increment. And that equals pi over 2. So that is, so the 0 I plot, the pi over 2 I plot, I add pi over 2 to that. I get pi. I plot that point. I add pi over 2 to that. I get 3 pi over 2. I plot that. And then I add pi over 2 to that. And I get 4 pi over 2 or 2 pi. Always reduce it. Okay, so those 5 boxes are my 5 points I'm going to plot. All right, so of course you already said my amplitude was 2. So 1 and 2, and -1 and -2. Okay, guys, in order to get full credit for every one of these problems, you have to label both axes, and I need to see every point that is plotted. So I need to see the 1, 2, and the -1, -2 on the y-axis, and I need to see each of these boxes, the 0, pi over 2, pi, 3 pi over 2, and 2 pi. I need to see them labeled too. So pi over 2, pi, 3 pi over 2, and 2 pi. Okay, and of course 0 is right there. So I have 5 points that I've plotted. So let's plot these now. As opposed to making a t-chart and figuring everything out, just remember sine starts at 0 or starts at the x-axis, and that's in quotes. Okay, you got to remember that sine starts at the x-axis. So we start at 0. And which way does sine go? Well, it goes up. So we're going to go up here. And then we're going to go back to pi. And then we're going to go to -2. And then we're going to go back to 0. So let me talk about these points that I just plotted. I am going to plot, maximum points, I'm going to plot minimum points, and I'm going to plot, in quotes, x-axis points. That's all I'm going to plot for sine, cosine, tangent, or sine and cosine. Okay, maximum points, minimum points, and x-axis points. That's all. So that's why you have 5 points here. And then once you plot those points, here's your graph. Okay, stop there. And then draw another arc going like that. And there you go. There's your graph. That's y equals 2 sine of x. Amplitude of 2, period of 2 pi, and we're good to go. All right, that's pretty easy. Let's graph y is equal to 1/2 cosine of x. So I am just going to, we know our amplitude is equal to 1/2. Okay, and this guy here, the period, x is between 0 and 2 pi. So that means the period is equal to 2 pi minus 0, which is 2 pi. And the increment is equal to 2 pi over 4, which is again pi over 2. That's going to change later, but again, I'm trying to get you guys used to it. Okay, so let's start out here. This is pi over 2, pi, 3 pi over 2, and 2 pi. Okay, and this is 1 and -1, so let's go to -1/2. And again, everything needs to be plotted. If you do not plot something and you just put a 1 there and randomly put in the middle there the 1/2 without writing extra 1/2, I'm not going to give you full credit. All right, so you got to remember, cosine starts at a maximum or a minimum. That's really important. So it's going to start at, in this case here, it's starting at a max because it's positive. And we're going to talk about negatives in a little bit. Okay, so we're going to start at a maximum point, 1/2. And remember I told you we're going to plot maximum points, minimum points, and 0 or x-axis points. So here's a max. There's a x-axis. There's a minimum. There's an x-axis. And there is a max. One thing I also want to talk about here, math fans, you will never go from a maximum to a minimum. You will always go from maximum to a 0 to a minimum to a 0 to a maximum. Okay, you never skip and just go right to from a max to a min. All right, so here's our graph. Curve. Here's the next curve. Curve. And then curve like that. Okay? Not bad. Not bad at all. All right, let's do a negative graph now. Y is equal to negative 3 sine of x. Okay, this is exactly the same. First of all, what's my amplitude? It's 3. Not negative 3, it's positive 3. So we're going to say that x is between 0 and 2 pi. And then the period is equal to 2 pi minus 0, which is 2 pi. The increment is equal to 2 pi over 4, which is pi over 2. So this is like the old days, or just a few minutes ago. All right, so let's graph this thing. Pi over 2, pi, 3 pi over 2, and 2 pi, or 4 pi over 2, which is 2 pi. All right, and 1, 2, 3. Negative 1, negative 2, negative 3. Okay, so we're talking sine here. Where does sine always start? It starts at the 0 point, or at the x-axis. Now this is the deal, math fans. It's negative. So instead of going up, we're going to go down. All right, so let's do that. So we're going to go down to here. So it started at a 0 at the x-axis, went to a minimum, goes back to the x-axis, goes to a maximum, and goes back to the x-axis. That's it. That's what your graph is going to look like. So again, be careful. It looks like this. Take the pen off the paper. And like that. Okay? And that's a negative 3 sine of x, because going down it's negative. Alright, so let's try one more here. Y equals negative 2 cosine of x. Okay, what's the amplitude? Positive 2. Alright, and let's, it's the same thing. X is between 0 and 2 pi. So the period equals 2 pi minus 0, which is 2 pi. And the increment is 2 pi over 4, which is pi over 2. Okay, so let's plot this on a graph. Pi over 2, pi, 3 pi over 2, and 2 pi. The amplitude is 2. Okay, where does cosine start? It starts at a max or a min. And in this case here, it's negative, so it's going to start at a minimum point. Got to remember that. So here we are. It's going to start at a minimum point. And then we're going to go to each one of those points is plotted. So we're going from minimum to 0 to a maximum to 0 to a minimum. That's it. Now, it's really tempting to do caveman style, but we're going to curve up like this. We're going to take the pen off the paper and curve back down again like that, and then curve like that. And that's your graph. All right, so I hope you guys got kind of the general idea of how to do this, okay? But that is basically just with amplitude. All right, and if you notice, let's just look at the total height. Do you guys agree that the total height is equal to 4? Because isn't it the difference between these two? So isn't it really 2 minus a negative 2, which is 4? So the total height is 4 for these problems. Okay, that's not too bad. All right, so that's it for amplitude, and then we're going to do translations Actually, we're going to do period next lesson, and then translations for vertical and horizontal translations for the next lesson after that. All right, that's it, math fans. Have a great day. Adios. Goodbye.